In this example, we're going to talk about multidimensional arrays. As you can see, working with arrays, multidimensional arrays. Here we have some chart data. I'm going to go through a few different examples using this structure here. A table with a header, and then 3 different columns with multiple rows. So this is really representing a multidimensional array. We'll take another peek at single dimension arrays, and then go into some more details. Think in terms of this example as multiple columns and multiple rows. So region A contains this set of data, region B contains this set of data, and region C contains this set of data. So let's take a peek at the example. If we look at the top, we'll just briefly talk about single dimension arrays and arrays in general. Now, there are many uses for working with multidimensional arrays. They've been in computer languages for quite some time. Object-oriented programming has allowed for different ways of programming, so you might be able to avoid using multidimensional arrays. XML is a big thing that has actually caused people to move away from multidimensional arrays as well. And then, of course, databases. So it is still popular to use multidimensional arrays to present data, but oftentimes it can be limited to a lot of math information and charting information, for example. So that needs to be said because they're great and they're very popular, but it's more or less a way to do something when you don't understand how to do other programming constructs and things like that. All right, so if we look at the single dimension array here, we have 0, 1, 2 as the elements here of the array. It's a single dimension array. There aren't double brackets here, double columns of information. And you can see we're only specifying the region A, region B, and region C. It's quite limited in how much data we can store in there and how we can present it. So when we go to the multiple dimension there, to the second dimension, you can see that we have all zeros here, and then we have 0, 1, 2 again. This is representing a row with 3 columns, region A, region B, and region C. So if we wanted to extend it into the data, we would have to use row 1, for example, and then continue from there. So this is representing the first row. This is representing the 0 row. But we're still having the columns line up here. 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2. And that's going to fit nicely within our structure. We could go out of the range here and put column 4, 5, and 6. We're only using 1, 2, and 3. So you can use whatever you want to, of course. So that's getting started with a multi-dimension array here. Now, it must be said also that you don't necessarily have to start with 0. You can start with any number that you want to. Now, commonly when you're programming, you're going to be working a lot with zeros because things are going to be based off of 0 from languages past and from some of the more professional languages that deal with professional programmers, of course. Now, you don't have to do that in PHP. PHP is very, very flexible. It gives us a lot of room to do things as we wish. You don't have to do that in C or C++ either. It's just more or less the way things are. You can use it as you need to. I'll use things starting at 1, 2, 10, 1,000, 32,000. It really doesn't matter here in PHP. So that being said, we'll talk about the example 2 that we have down here that's going to further explain how we can store data and then later how we can present the data. Because the first thing we need to do is fill up our variables. We need to fill up our array. And then from there, we can present it. So we have a variable chart. And notice the extra spaces here. That's just for clarity. That's just so you can see things very, very clearly. PHP doesn't care about the white space outside of your quotes, of course. So we're specifying a chart data part of our multidimensional array. Then we have rows and columns. You can switch that to be columns and rows if you want to. It really doesn't matter. But for clarity, it should be rows and columns, of course. Notice we're now starting at the first column here, 1, 2, 3. We're ignoring the 0 column that you see up top. I just put it there to let you know that we are ignoring it. Sometimes you might want to loop things based on 1 because that's just going to make more sense to you, especially in the beginning. And other times you want to base things off of 0. When you base things off of 1, you know that when you deal with the 7th element, that's your highest element, you know that you have 7 elements there. If you did the 0 base, it would be 0 to 6, and then you'd have to think about it a little bit and say, okay, well, how many do I have? Did I start at 0 or 1? If you start at 0 and you have 7 total elements, then you know that the 6th element is going to be the last element that you can reference. So it gets a little bit confusing there for you. So it's meant to be used the way you want to use it. All right, so chart data is specified here. If we wanted to, we could change this to sales data, and that would be further extending this outer dimension, this third dimension. Single dimension starting with this on the right here, the second dimension here in the middle, and then we extend out to the third dimension as we move further and further out. So we can have chart data and sales data, as you can see, based on what we do here. So that's just specifying the header. We're not worried about anything more than just set these values here, region A, region B, region C, and then we'll print out the header there at the top of our table. Now we're storing all the details of the data. We're going from row 1 to 25, less than or equal to 25. Now, you don't have to use for loops here. I do it on purpose because you can start anywhere you want to find the data. You can start at row 10 if you wanted to and continue to row 75. It really doesn't matter. It's up to you how you use this. There are other ways to use for loops, of course, and there are other just ways of getting through this data, while loops for each as you wish. All right, so chart data is what we're going to be specifying. We're also going to do sales data and projected data. We can look at each of these or all of these if we wanted to. What we're doing is filling up the values. We're using the rand function to put a range of data here, a range of numeric data. So we're going from 0 to 100 here. That's the range. We're telling PHP to pick a random number between 0 and 100. Here we're specifying a higher value, a wider choice of random numbers. That's sales data. Projected data is pretty similar. But the important thing is that we're picking which of these buckets we want to put it into, and then using the multidimensional concepts, we're using rows and columns to put those variables in there as it selects it from the inner loop, 1, 2, and 3, and then it goes through each row, 1 through 25, and loops and loops and loops till all that data is stored. We'll look at another example down here using a different way to present our data, but that's how we get the data into the array. All right, so now we want to show the text. We want to present HTML. So in the top of the table here, we have one row, which is serving as our header. We're just echoing out $chart, chart data, the 0 row, and then columns 1, 2, and 3. Again, we skip the 0 column by design. No big deal. As you wish. All right, so now we come down further, and you can see we're displaying the data here for each row, and then for each column, 1, 2, and 3. We alternate between white and gray for the colors there in a nice, neat way. We're using the mod function again, the % sign. So this is saying if we're on row 9, for example, 9 mod 2, if that equals 0, then we're going to change the CSS class for that row to gray. Otherwise, we're going to keep it as white. So 9% 2, 9 mod 2 is going to be 1 because 9 mod 2 is going to fit as much as it can of 2 within 9. And we know that 2 times 4 is 9. We get 1 left over. That's the remainder. This function finds the remainder, whereas the division sign will divide it and give you back a whole number. 9 divided by 2 is going to not equal 1, of course. So in this example, 2 times 4 is equal to 8, and 9 minus 8 is 1. So this is going to not equal 0. So this will not be gray. It'll stay white. If we're on the 10th row, for example, 2 divides evenly into 10, so we will get a 0 value, and so the even rows are going to be gray. The odd rows will stay white. All right, so then we have our inner loop here, 1, 2, and 3 for the columns, and we're just presenting chart data. Then the row, then the column, and it loops based on the details here, and it just creates our table structure. We'll peek at it, right-click, refresh, and you see that it's picking new random numbers for A, B, and C. Well, we could change this to sales data to show you that that data is there and ready and willing to be used. It's just that we're not referencing it. So we'll change this from chart data to sales data. Save it. and then we see bigger numbers here, a wider range of random numbers, and higher, of course. So now we're referencing the sales data. We could change the header there as well. We'll undo that. We'll take a peek up further real quick to show you a different way to present things. We'll take the comments out of this little section here. And we'll see that instead of doing that inner loop, we're going to set specifically each column here with a different range of values from 0 to 1,999, and the same thing for 2,000 and 3,000. Just for each of those columns within chart data for each of the 25 rows that we want to present. So now we're storing different data here in this example. Right-click, refresh, and there you see region A, range of 1,000 to 1,999, the 2,000 range for region B, and then the 3,000 range for region C. And lucky we have that last one there, just by random luck. So there you have it, many different ways to use multidimensional arrays, some good information about the uses for multidimensional arrays and why you might want to go with something else like XML or database functionality, for example.